My parents have been secretly funding my sister's wild lifestyle using the money I send them for their mortgage. I finally confront them, and they end up telling me that I am not their biological daughter. So I go and find my biological parents, but when I see who they are, I leave running and block them. Hi everyone, I'm Harper, 27 female, and my family is pretty small. Just my parents, my younger sister Aria, 22 female, and me. Overall, I had a good childhood. There were times I definitely felt like my parents played favorites, and it always seemed to lean towards my sister. Back then, I kind of brushed it off, figuring it was just the whole younger sibling thing. But she always seemed to have access to cooler stuff than I did, and looking back, it does sting a little. Let me give you some examples. For one thing, the curfew thing was totally unfair. When I was 16, I had to be home by 10 p.m. on weekends, midnight at the absolute latest. Aria, by the time she was 16, she could stay out until 1 a.m., sometimes even later. I remember begging my parents to let me do the same, and all I got was, "Your sister is more mature," or "We trust Aria's judgment." I guess all those years of being the responsible one counted for absolutely nothing. And how about clothes? I swear, Aria always got a way bigger allowance than I did. Plus, my parents seemed way more willing to shell out for designer stuff for her. Me, I was hitting up the thrift stores way before they were cool. Birthday parties were another sore spot. I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of a low-key kid. A sleepover with a few friends and a pizza was my idea of a great birthday. Aria, huge bashes with themes, decorations, the whole 9 yards. I know they tried to make mine special too, but it always felt like hers were just more. Don't even get me started on the car situation. I carefully saved every penny I could from babysitting and my part-time job at the grocery store. By the time I turned 17, I had enough for a beat-up old Honda Civic. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine, and I was proud of it. Aria turned 16, brand new, well, new to her, Toyota Corolla. My parents swore it wasn't favoritism, that her car was safer. Right. I could go on. For the summer, I worked at a local diner to pay for half of a class trip to Europe, and my parents paid for Aria to go on the same trip without lifting a finger. Or how she got an iPhone way before I did, even though I was the one with a job. Or, and maybe this was the worst one, how Aria got away with stuff I'd have been grounded for life for. We both snuck out a few times, but I was always the one who got caught and punished. However, we both grew up eventually and moved out of the house. I went to college, did my postgrad, and landed a pretty sweet engineering job at a big IT company. The pay's good, the life's good. Things with my family were kind of the same. Decent, but with that lingering hint that Aria was still the favorite. Meanwhile, my sister seems to have really lost her way. She dropped out of college her second year, which hey, I get it. College isn't for everyone. But since then, it's been one mess after another. Parties, coming home wasted, and yeah, she still lives with our parents. Here's where things get weird. It's like she expects me to fix things for her. The last time I visited, she swiped my credit card to buy some ridiculously expensive designer bag. I found out, confronted her, and she actually had the nerve to say, "But you make so much money, you can't afford it." It doesn't matter that I actually worked for that money. And then there are the jobs. Okay, so maybe she doesn't want the traditional 9 to 5. I get that. But she'll get excited about some amazing opportunity, last of all 2 weeks, and then quit or get fired. It's been everything from some weird multi-level marketing thing to trying to be a social media quote-unquote influencer, which apparently is more about partying than actual work, from what I could tell. Honestly, the worst part is her attitude towards our parents. They're bending over backward for her, paying her bills, letting her live rent-free, and she doesn't even say thank you. She just acts like it's their job to take care of her. One time, they planned this nice family dinner. Aria got mad about something stupid, stormed out, and came back hours later like nothing happened. I wanted to scream at her, but my parents just acted like it was okay. She's constantly asking me for money too, always with some sob story. Last month it was, I need to fix my car so I can get to the job interviews. Turns out she used it to go on a weekend trip with her friends. And you know what gets me? I don't even think she does this stuff on purpose to be mean. It's like she truly doesn't understand the consequences of her actions. Or maybe she does, and just doesn't care. That's almost worse sometimes. Don't get me wrong, I want the best for my sister. But I also get so frustrated. She has tons of potential, but she's just squandering it. And it breaks my heart to see my parents enabling her. They're so afraid of conflict, so focused on keeping her happy, that they don't see how she's taken advantage of them. It feels like no matter how old we get, the dynamic in that house hasn't changed. I'm the responsible older sister, Aria's the one who needs rescuing, and our parents just want to keep the peace, no matter what the cost. Sometimes, I think about trying to have a serious talk with Aria or staging some kind of intervention with my parents, but then I wonder, what's the point? Would she even listen? Would my parents finally stand up to her? Part of me doubts it, and that honestly is the most frustrating part of all. About 2 years back, during the Christmas holidays, when I was visiting home, things took a weird turn. One evening, my parents sat me down looking all serious. They said they needed to talk, and my stomach immediately did a flip. Turns out, they were in trouble financially, like behind on their mortgage trouble. I was shocked. I asked what the heck had happened. My dad has his own landscaping business, and he grumbled about it being slow, but I never imagined things were this bad. I agreed to help out, of course, but that's when it got frustrating. Every month, like clockwork, the phone call would come. Harper, we're a little short on the mortgage this month. Now, it's not a huge amount, enough to stress me out financially or anything, but here's the thing. It's been going on for almost 2 years now. At first, I figured things would turn around for my dad's business. He started talking about getting new clients, expanding, but honestly, I don't see much changing. And it's not just the money. It feels like this secret I have to carry around. I want to talk to my sister about it, but how? Do I just casually be like, hey, so did you happen to notice that I'm basically paying our parents' mortgage? I know she would flip out, and that might cause even more drama. And honestly, I'm starting to resent it. Not my parents, but the situation. I worked hard in school, got this good job, I'm careful with my money. Meanwhile, Aria's living it up, never worrying about bills, and our parents are totally fine supporting that lifestyle. I know it's not her fault necessarily, but sometimes it stings. Like maybe if they weren't constantly worried about her, or bailing her out, or bending over backward for her, their finances wouldn't be in such a mess, you know. The other day, I was venting about all this to my best friend. She was sympathetic, but then she said, okay, but what's the long-term plan here? Are you just going to pay their mortgage forever? That hit me hard, because I have no idea. Do I tell them I can't keep doing this? But then what? They lose the house? Do I keep giving up my hard-earned cash, knowing it's partly fueling my sister's recklessness? It feels like this giant mess that's somehow become my responsibility, and I don't know what the right way out is. Then, about a month ago, at my sister's 22nd birthday, things took a turn for the worse. My parents, as always, insisted on throwing a big party. Catering, way too many people, the whole shebang. When it came time for gifts, I braced myself for the usual over-the-top presents. But this was on a whole different level. They presented Aria with tickets for a trip to Vietnam, along with spending money for the whole Asia backpacking adventure she's been obsessed with. I mean, that trip had to have cost at least $5,000, maybe even more. And remember, this is from the parents who can't afford their own mortgage. I sat there stunned. It wasn't even about jealousy, though there might have been a little twinge of that. It was the sheer unfairness of it all. Here I am, busting my butt, being responsible, helping them out, and Aria gets this, a reward for her wild child lifestyle, basically. I tried not to let it show, but inside, I was fuming. The worst part, no one else seemed to think it was weird. Aria was squealing about how excited she was. My parents were beaming with pride, and everyone else just gushed about how amazing the trip would be. I felt invisible, like the whole responsible daughter thing suddenly didn't matter. I left the party early, making some excuse about a work thing. On the drive home, I was fighting back tears. It sounded so stupid and dramatic, but that trip was like the final straw. All the resentment I'd been bottling up just came bubbling to the surface. Did they even realize how it looked? Did they care? But I couldn't let this go. Anger and frustration buzzed inside me. So the next day, I drove straight back to my parents' house. Aria was still there, lounging on the couch like she didn't have a care in the world. I didn't bother with small talk. I looked straight at my parents and asked them point blank how on earth they could afford Aria's trip when they couldn't even cover their mortgage payments. Aria piped up with, "What are you even talking about?" I turned on her, finally letting the resentment loose. "Don't act innocent," I said. "Our parents are in financial trouble and have been paying their mortgage for the last 2 years. How did you not know, living here with them?" Her eyes widened in surprise. Then came the defensiveness. "Well, they never seem stressed," she shot back. "Plus, they're always giving me money for clothes, going out, whatever." My jaw dropped. Was she serious? Suddenly, everything was so clear. All those times I'd sent money, thinking about my dad working long hours in the hot sun, had actually been going towards funding Aria's carefree lifestyle. A wave of anger washed over me, stronger than before. "That's my point," I almost shouted. "The money I send them is supposed to keep a roof over their heads so they can focus on getting back on track, not being your personal ATM." Aria finally seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. She turned to our parents, looking confused and hurt. "Is this true? Harper's been helping you, and you didn't tell me?" My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. My mom mumbled something about not wanting to worry her, and my dad muttered about it being temporary. But excuses weren't going to cut it anymore. This wasn't just about the money. It was about feeling used, about the unfairness that had been simmering for years finally boiling over. Part of me felt a tinge of guilt for unloading this on Aria, but the other part, well, that part honestly didn't care. She needed a reality check, and maybe this was the only way to get one. My anger surged. "So, were you using the money I sent for my mortgage to fund Aria's lifestyle?" I demanded from my mom. She sputtered, "No, of course not. It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" I shot back. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been turning my sacrifices into her personal spending spree." Things escalated quickly. Aria burst into tears and stormed out of the room. My mom looked furious, hissing, "Look what you've done now." That's when I snapped. "All you can think about is Aria." Even now, I yelled. "What about what you've done to me? Funding your favorite daughter's life on my hard-earned dime." My mom paled, her anger shifting into something like defensiveness. And then the words came, the ones that would turn my whole world upside down. "That's because we never wanted you." I froze. What does that mean? My voice was barely a whisper. My mom tried to backtrack, stammering about stress and not meaning it, but I wouldn't let her change the subject. This wasn't about a fight anymore. My entire sense of self was crumbling. I needed to know. With a shaking voice, I repeated, "What did you mean by that?" She sighed heavily, looking defeated, and then the truth came tumbling out. I wasn't their biological daughter. They'd adopted me as a baby. My birth parents were their relatives, unable to care for me, and my mom and dad had always wanted a family. They swore they would love me from the moment they saw me, that I was their miracle baby. My mind was a whirlwind. Shock, betrayal, a strange, overwhelming numbness. All those years of feeling like I never quite measured up, like something wasn't quite right, suddenly had a horrifying explanation. It wasn't me. It wasn't that I wasn't good enough. I wasn't theirs in the way that I thought I was. At least not the way Aria was. The rest of the confrontation is hazy. More tears, more shouting, accusations I didn't even know I'd been harboring for years, spilling out in a messy, painful jumble. I remember my mom saying they'd always planned to tell me, but the timing never seemed right. They always tried to treat Aria and me equally. None of it mattered. The foundation of my life felt like it had cracked. My head pounded with a mix of rage and a desperate need for answers. "Tell me," I demanded, my voice shaking. "Who are my birth parents?" My mom seemed resigned. "Harper, believe me, you don't want to meet them." "That's not your decision to make," I retorted. Begrudgingly, she gave me a phone number and a crumpled piece of paper with an address. "You can start there," she sighed. Back home, I tried the number. Nothing. Voicemail. I waited, pacing like a caged animal, but no callback. I couldn't stand it any longer. Screw it, I thought. I'm doing this. The next day, I drove to the address. It was a small, slightly run-down house in a neighborhood I didn't know well. I knew this was impulsive, maybe even reckless, but I couldn't wait anymore. I had to see them, to confront them. A woman answered the door. Rachel, she said her name was. I took a deep breath. I'm Annie's daughter, I said, using my adoptive mom's name. Confusion, then recognition flickered across Rachel's face. Her smile was warm, but tinged with sadness. Come in, she said, surprising me with her kindness. They asked how I was, how Annie was. The usual small talk felt surreal, knowing what I was about to reveal. A man joined us. Charles, he said. Again, that hesitant warmth. I couldn't take it anymore. The truth burst out of me. I'm Annie's daughter. You're my biological parents. Silence hung heavy in the air. Then, a flicker in their eyes, like they were trying to place a memory. Oh, Rachel said softly. You're little Harper. You've grown so much. My question spilled out, laced with years of concealed pain. Why? Why did you give me up? Rachel spoke, her voice trembling slightly. She was young, she confessed, barely out of her teens. Charles, he wasn't my biological father. My real dad had vanished when he found out she was pregnant. Alone and scared, she made the agonizing choice to let me go, hoping I would have a better life. Rachel seemed genuinely kind, her voice soft and sweet as she asked about my life. She even took my number, promising to stay in touch. It was all so normal. That's why when my gaze strayed past her and landed on the living room wall, the disconnect was jarring. My stomach lurched into a sickening knot. Framed, hanging proudly, were Nazi paraphernalia, swastikas, propaganda posters. My birth mother, the woman who just offered me tea with a gentle smile, was a Nazi. An icy panic seized me. My mind raced a desperate need to escape clawing at my insides. The kind words, the offer of connection, it all felt tainted, poisonous. I mumbled something about having to leave. A sudden work emergency. Rachel looked confused, asking why I was rushing out when I just arrived, but I didn't care. I grabbed my purse, practically bolted for the door, and fled to the sanctuary of my car. As I drove, hands shaking on the wheel, a sickening thought echoed through my head. My mom was right. I didn't want to meet them, but not for the reasons she thought. My whole worldview felt shattered. This wasn't just about being adopted. It was the realization that my biological mother held these hateful, monstrous beliefs. Was I the product of that ideology or a fortunate escape? It was too much to grapple with at that moment. All I could do was block her number, erase any possibility of further contact. Driving home felt like fleeing a war zone. I found myself checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to be chased down by something monstrous and vile. Upon reaching my apartment, I collapsed on the sofa, waves of nausea washing over me. My head spun. Birth mother or Nazi, adoptive mother playing favorites. It was too much. An overwhelming sense of unfairness washed over me, replacing the panic with a deep, throbbing ache. Here I was, trying my best, being good, and this was the result? This was the universe spitting in my face? I called my adoptive mom, needing something, reassurance, an apology. I wasn't sure. When she answered, I blurted out the accusation. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you warn me my birth mother was a Nazi? Her defensive response was immediate. Harper, I told you to not contact them. How was I supposed to know that meant she was a freaking Nazi? I practically shrieked, anger seeping into my voice. The silence on the other end of the line crackled with tension. Then, my mom's voice, softer this time. I didn't think it was relevant. I just thought you were better off not knowing. Better off? I scoffed internally. Better off stumbling blindly into a room draped with swastikas and smiles? No, I deserve to know. I hung up, rage bubbling in my gut. The rest of the day was a blur. I paced and tried to distract myself with work, but my mind refused to cooperate. Images from Rachel's living room flickered behind my eyelids, mingling with flashes of my childhood. Aria's birthday parties, the fun family vacations where I felt like a third wheel, and the whispered resentment I'd always buried. It all formed a toxic tapestry of betrayal and fear. Who could I even tell about this? My best friend would not understand why this was so uniquely horrifying. My boyfriend, kind and loving as he was, wouldn't grasp the deep-rooted complexities of my family situation. I'd never felt more isolated, more adrift. As the day turned to night, I collapsed on my bed, exhausted but unable to sleep. Questions swirled in my mind. Should I confront my adoptive mom again and demand the whole truth? Should I even try to make sense of my connection to Rachel, a woman whose worldview was the antithesis of my own? I don't even think that I have the strength to face any of this. I think it will be better to simply run, change my name, and try to pretend none of this ever happened. What do you guys think? Hi guys, thank you for your kind comments. I have an update for you. Days turned to weeks, and my emotional turmoil simmered below the surface. I avoided calls from my adoptive mom, too drained to face another argument. The encounter with Rachel remained a festering wound I refused to examine too closely. Denial couldn't last forever. Then my carefully constructed bubble burst. It started with texts. "Hi Harper, it's Rachel. Hope you're doing well." Followed by innocuous questions about my work, my city, like a hesitant stranger trying to make a connection. I think maybe she was texting me from Charles's number. I ignored them. Then came the calls, blocked as soon as I recognized the number. My anxiety ratcheted up a notch. Why was she so persistent? Hadn't my hasty exit made my feelings clear? The escalation was swift and unnerving. A package arrived at my apartment, homemade cookies and a knitted scarf, with a note scrawled in embarrassingly cheerful handwriting. "Just a little something to let you know I'm thinking of you. Love, Rachel." I threw it all away, disgust and fear twisting in my stomach. Was this some kind of warped love bombing tactic? How did she even get my address? The following week, worse. I was leaving my apartment building when I spotted her. Rachel stood across the street with a hopeful, almost desperate sort of smile. She started to cross, and I panicked, ducking back inside and taking the stairs to the roof to avoid her. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was this harassment? Could I get a restraining order against my own biological mother? This couldn't continue. My attempts at avoidance had failed spectacularly. She wasn't going to just disappear. Dread settled over me like a suffocating blanket. I had to confront her. Even though the thought terrified me, I spent hours rehearsing what I would say, trying to find a balance between brutal honesty and some semblance of civility. In the end, I sent a simple text. "Meet me at the coffee shop near my house, tomorrow 2 p.m. Come alone." The next day, sitting across from Rachel in the crowded coffee shop felt surreal. She looked older than I remembered, worry lines etched around her eyes. A hopeful smile flickered across her face, then faltered when she met my stony expression. "Harper, I'm so happy to see you," she began, and I cut her off. "Stop," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Stop pretending this is a normal mother-daughter reunion. It's not. I know why you gave me up, and I know who you are." Her eyes widened in confusion, then narrowed. "I don't understand." "Don't play dumb," I snapped, the anger that had been simmering suddenly flaring. "The swastikas, the propaganda. I saw it all in your house." She paled, and the sickening realization hit me that she truly hadn't thought I would notice or care. Disgust surged through me. "You are a Nazi," I stated, my voice flat, "and I want nothing to do with you." Rachel sputtered denials, claims that she'd changed, that her beliefs were just political, but I wouldn't listen. There were no excuses for the hateful ideology she'd embraced. No justification for the way she downplayed the horrors that stemmed from those beliefs. "I am not your project," I told her, standing up. "I'm not some wayward soul for you to save. I'm happy, I have a good life, and I don't need you or your poison in it. Don't contact me again." I left the coffee shop feeling shaky, but also, strangely, lighter. It wasn't closure. It wasn't some magic healing moment. But it was me drawing a line, putting a stop to something before it spiraled out of my control. The fear hadn't entirely vanished, but it had been replaced by a steely sort of resolve. This woman was a part of my biological history, but she had no claim on my present or future. That at least was something I could control. Reaching out to Rachel proved to be a colossal mistake, far worse than I could have predicted. The problem wasn't just her continued attempts to contact me, as they were annoying but manageable. No, it was the ripple effect. Suddenly, Rachel was reaching out to my adopted mom, Annie. It started with a letter, handwritten, rambling, and full of accusations about how she must have poisoned me against her. Of course, my mom called me the instant she read it, voice tied with a mix of anger and confusion. "Harper, what have you done? This woman, Rachel, says that you told her horrible lies about her, and now she won't leave me alone." "What?" I sputtered, incredulous. "Are you serious? Did you tell her I'm the one who reached out in the first place?" A pause. "Well, no, but she shouldn't be bothering me like this. It's all your fault for stirring up trouble." My jaw almost hit the floor. Was she blaming me for my birth mother's harassment? The absurdity of it left me speechless for a moment. Finally, I managed to choke out, "Mom, I wouldn't have contacted her if you'd just been honest about who she was." That set off another round of arguments. The truth was, I think my mom mostly just wanted the whole situation to go away, for Rachel to stop her relentless attempts at reconciliation and leave our family in peace. But Rachel, fueled by her bizarre conviction that I'd been turned against her, escalated her attempts to get through to Annie. She started leaving voicemails, her voice high-pitched and pleading, insisting that Annie hear her side of the story, that she wasn't the monster I'd made her out to be. When Annie ignored those, Rachel began calling her work number. My mom, usually so calm and organized, was rattled. She would complain to me each night, detailing the latest attempt at contact, her voice laced with frustration. And somehow, even through her own distress, there was that undercurrent of blame directed at me, as if I were the puppeteer controlling Rachel's actions. The constant calls filled with complaints turned into a final straw for me. One evening, after yet another of Rachel's desperate voicemails had thrown my mom into a tailspin, something in me snapped. "I'm done," I told my mom, my voice laced with exhaustion and simmering anger that had been building for far too long. "I'm done being blamed for this whole Rachel fiasco." "Harper, don't be dramatic," she replied, the exasperated tone I'd grown accustomed to. "I just wish you hadn't stirred things up in the first place." Stirred things up? I let out a bitter laugh. "Mom, she's a Nazi, and she's harassing you. How is any of this my fault?" An uncomfortable silence descended. Then, in a softer tone, my mom said, "Well, maybe if you could just hear her out, understand her side." That's when I lost it. Hear her out? Understand her side? Are you actually serious right now? My voice rose with each word. Is there some good side to being a Nazi that I'm missing? Are you even hearing yourself? More silence, then a sigh. "Harper, you're so stubborn, so quick to judge." Finally, the words I'd been thinking for weeks burst from my lips. "If you want to communicate with me again, I need an apology for everything, for hiding Rachel's true nature, for all the years of making me feel like an outsider, for blaming me for the fallout of your own choices. Otherwise, just leave me alone." I also told her that there won't be any more mortgage payments, and from what I have seen, they don't really need it. I hung up, leaving a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Part of me felt guilty for the harshness, but a larger part felt resolute. I couldn't take it anymore. The burden of making everyone else comfortable while my own pain was dismissed felt heavier than ever. The next few days were a strange mix of relief and guilt. I ignored my mom's texts, mostly variations of "Harper, please call me," and "We need to talk." Maybe, just maybe, this was the shock they needed. The only way to force them to confront their own actions and realize the damage they'd done. Or maybe this was it, the breaking point. The painful truth was, I wasn't sure I cared anymore. I deserved a family that loved me unconditionally, that valued me, that didn't treat me like an accessory or a scapegoat. Hi guys, I know it's been a month, and honestly, there wasn't a whole lot to update about for a while. The good news is that Rachel seemed to have backed off. After my dad's threat of a restraining order, she finally stopped the constant calls and attempts to reach my mom. It's a relief, let me tell you. As for my parents, well, there was an apology. Sort of. A few stilted texts from my mom, and a mumbled voicemail from my dad, expressing regret for not being more understanding. It didn't exactly erase years of hurt, and to be honest, it felt about as genuine as a dollar store greeting card. For now, I've decided to maintain my distance. A little breathing room seems like the healthiest option. I answer the occasional text and keep conversations superficial, but I'm not rushing back into their lives like nothing happened. Maybe in time, things can be repaired, but that sort of trust takes a while to rebuild. And seriously, I want to thank you all for the support and advice during this whole saga. It meant a lot. Sometimes, even just venting to strangers on the internet can be a lifesaver, you know. And that was it for today's story. Thank you very much for listening. Smash that like button for me and subscribe for more stories. Thanks again, and we'll be seeing you in the next one.